Hello and welcome back to another EDH gameplay here on this channel. Before we get into today's gameplay, I not only want to make a shout out to Kaiju Cards in Trier, Germany for providing a great place for us where we can play our TCGs, but I also would like to mention that these gameplays are not only a lot of fun, but they are also a lot of work for me, so I'd really appreciate if you would either leave a nice comment or also subscribe to my channel, as that really helps me out and keeps me motivated to keep going with these gameplays. I have recently built Kroxa Kunoros, which is a Mardu reanimator deck, which will reanimate a few big threats onto the board. Yoshio is new to this channel and has upgraded Pantlaza's Sun Favored from the Precon and wants to win with an army of dinosaurs. Christopher got his hands on Dr. Madison Lee and upgraded to Precon to win with energy counters. Kevin is new to this channel and has brought Preston the Vanisher, which is a mono-white flicker deck, and we pretty quickly found out how he wants to win the game. Alright everybody, I'd say let's jump right into the gameplay. Christopher starts us off and draws, he plays a tapped land and passes. Kevin untaps and draws, he plays a land and he plays an Esper Sentinel. He passes, so I draw, I play a land and I pass the turn. Joshua draws for his turn, he plays a tapped land and says go. Christopher draws, he plays a land and he taps 2 and casts an Arcane Signet. He doesn't pay for Espers, so Kevin draws and untaps. He draws, he plays a land and follows it up with a Spirited Companion, drawing a card on ETB. Afterwards he tries to pass the turn, but I swamp cycle a Troll of Khazad-dûn, finding a Shadowy Backstreet. Then I go to my turn, I draw for it, I play the Shadowy Backstreet and surveil 1 into my graveyard. Afterwards I pass the turn, so Joshua untaps and draws. He plays a land and he taps a total of 2 mana to cast Marauding Raptor. He passes, so Christopher untaps and draws. He taps a total of 3 mana to cast Dr. Madison Lee. He plays a tapped land and passes the turn. Kevin untaps and draws. He plays a land. He taps a total of 3 mana to cast Sonic Screwdriver. Afterwards he attacks me for 1. And then he passes the turn, so I untap. I draw for my turn, and as I draw I pay the miracle cost for Reforge the Soul. So we all wheel our hands and draw 7. Afterwards I play a swamp. And then I tap it to cast Reanimate. I target Aeol the Dawnsky in Kevin's graveyard, and then I pass my turn. Joshua untaps, he plays a land, and he taps a total of 3 mana to cast Cultivate, finding more basic lands. He can't pay for Esper, so Kevin draws, and then Joshua attacks Kevin for 2 damage. Afterwards he passes the turn, so Christopher untaps. He draws, he plays a land for turn, he taps a total of 3 mana to cast Steel Maverick, Paladin Dance. He gets an energy counter on cast. He taps his commander to use his energy counter to give Steel Maverick haste, and then he attacks Kevin for 4 total. He blocks with his Esper Sentinel, and Christopher gains 4, and Kevin loses 3 life. Christopher passes the turn, so Kevin untaps and draws. He taps 1 mana to cast Altar of the Brood. He plays a land, so we all mill 1. Then he plays a Druid Lotus. We mill 1, he cracks it, he pays a few more mana to cast Preston the Vanisher. On ETB we mill, and then he taps 2 more mana to cast Flicker of Fate, flickering his Spirited Companion, drawing 2 cards, creating an illusion, and we all have to mill 2 cards. Afterwards he pays 1 mana to cast Land Tax, so we all mill 1, and then he wants to pass the turn. So I untap, I draw for my turn, I play a land, I tap 1 land to cast Soaring. Afterwards I move to combat and AO attacks Kevin for 5 in the air. He takes it, and in my second main phase I tap a total of 4 mana to cast Grasp of Fate, targeting Marauding Raptor and both commanders of Christopher and Kevin. Afterwards I pass the turn, so Joshua untaps, he plays a land and he taps 5 mana to cast Pantlaza. He discovers 4 until he hits a Wayward Sawtooth, which he also casts. He plays his second land, and in his end step Christopher cycles an Ash Barrens and then goes to his turn. He untaps, he draws, he plays a land. He attacks Kevin for 3, who blocks with an illusion token. Christopher gains 3, and afterwards he taps a total of 3 mana to cast an Endurance Bobblehead. Afterwards he passes the turn, so Kevin untaps and uses his land tax trigger to find basic lands. He draws for his turn, he plays a Nycthos, so we all mill 1. Afterwards he taps a total of 6 mana to cast Evangel of Heliod, making 4 tokens, so we all mill a total of 5. I untap, I draw, I play a land, I tap a total of 6 mana to cast my commander Kroxa Kunoros. On ETB I exile 5 cards, bringing back Drana the Last Bloodchief. I move to combat and I attack Kevin for 5 in the air. He takes it, and afterwards I pass my turn. Joshua untaps, he draws, he plays 2 lands for turn, and afterwards he casts a Shifting Ceratops, discovering for 4, hitting Savage Stomp, putting a counter on his Swordtooth, which fights Drana the Last Bloodchief. She dies, and afterwards he attacks Christopher for 4 with Pantlaza. He takes it. In Joshua's end step, Christopher pays 2 and cracks his Myriad Landscape to find 2 islands. He goes to his turn, untaps, he draws. He taps a total of 3 mana to cast Thirst for Knowledge, drawing 3 cards and discarding an artifact card. He taps 5 mana to cast his commander Dr. Madison Lee. He plays a land and then he attacks Kevin with his Paladin, who blocks with a token, and Christopher gains 3. Afterwards he passes the turn, so Kevin untaps. He uses his land text to find 3 more lands. He draws for his turn. He taps a total of 3 mana to cast Ashnod's Altar. He plays a land, so we all mill 1. He sacrifices a few tokens to recast his commander Preston. He plays a land, so we mill again. And then he generates a lot of mana with Nykthos to cast Restoration Angel, flickering his Evangel. Overall, we ended up with milling a total of 16 cards because he creates an illusion of Evangel and he created a total of 16 tokens. So in this turn alone we milled over 20 cards each, and then he has to discard to hand size. I untap and draw. I play a land. I attack Kevin with both of my creatures, Kroxa as an attack trigger, and on attack I bring back Elishnorn Grand Cenobite. All of his tokens die and he blocks my commander, but he still takes a total of 7 and I gain 8. Afterwards I flash back Faithless Looting, drawing 2 cards and discarding 2 cards. Then I cast a Demonic Tutor, finding a card to my hand, and after that I pay 2 to cast Altar of Dementia, and then I pass the turn. Joshua untaps and draws. He plays 2 lands for his turn. Then he taps a total of 3 mana to cast Lifecrafter's Bestiary. And then he taps a total of 6 mana to cast Etali Primal Storm. On cast he pays a green to draw a card. And then he discovers into a Progenitor's Icon. He attacks Kevin for a total of 4. He takes it and then Joshua passes the turn. Christopher untaps and draws. He taps a total of 4 mana to cast Joyros Familiar. And we will catch in a minute that they all die due to Elishnorn, because he also casts an Assaultron Dominator, so he gets a total of 4 energy, but then those creatures die. Afterwards he taps his commander and spends 3 energy to draw a card. He plays a land, and then he passes the turn. Kevin untaps, he draws for his turn, he taps 2 mana to scry with his Screwdriver, leaves the card on top. He plays a land, so we all mill 1. Afterwards he taps 4 mana to cast Felidar Guardian, flickering his commander, and that will totally mill us all for 2 cards. Afterwards he passes the turn, so I untap and draw. I play a land, and then I move to combat and attack Kevin with everything. On attack I bring back Chainer Nightmare Adept. In response he sacrifices his commander into his altar, making 2 colorless, and then he casts Sigiri Shelter, protecting his Felidar Guardian, and dying on the way out. I gain 8 life. I then activate Chainer, discarding Liesa, and then I tap enough mana to cast Liesa, Forgotten Archangel. Afterwards I pass the turn. Joshua untaps, he draws, he plays a land, and he taps enough mana to cast the Karma Primal Calamity. He untaps all of his lands and discovers into Vita Trainer Prodigy. He taps 3 mana to let the Karma fight my Elishnorn. Elishnorn gets sacrificed into Altar of Dementia, milling myself for 4. Afterwards he uses his Rogue's Passage to make Italia unblockable. On attack we exile the top cards of our library. And so Joshua is able to cast Unexpected Windfall from Christopher, discarding a card, drawing 2 cards and making 2 treasure tokens. I use my lifelinkers to double block Pantlaza, gaining 10, but I also lose 12 due to the Swordtooth and to Etali, going down to 48. In the second main phase Joshua plays another land and he taps enough mana to destroy my Altar of Dementia with his Karma. In response I sacrifice Liesa into the altar, milling myself for 4, and then Altar is destroyed. Afterwards he taps even more mana to kill my Kroxa Kunoros with Sakama's ability, and Kroxa goes to the graveyard. In his end step I get Elishnorn back due to Liesa. Christopher untaps and casts 1 with the machine, drawing 3 cards total. And then he taps another 3 mana to cast Synth Eradicator, getting an energy on cast. Afterwards he attacks me with the Eradicator, exiling the top card and also exiling it to get 2 more energy. I take a total of 6 damage because he also attacks me with the Paladin, and Christopher gains 3 life. I untap and draw. I use Chainer to discard a card and then I recast my commander Kroxa Kunoros from the graveyard, exiling 5 cards to bring back Vein Ripper. I move to combat and Kroxa attacks Joshua. On attack, I bring back Harvester of Souls and Joshua decides to block with Zakama and his Shifting Ceratops. I assign full damage to Zakama and I drain him with Vein Ripper and draw cards due to Harvester of Soul. I tap 2 more mana to cast Loctwain Scorn, killing Zakama. That drains him and I draw a card. Afterwards I pass the turn, so Joshua untaps. He draws, taps a total of a lot of mana to cast Apex Altisor, fighting my Vein Ripper, triggering Ward. He sacrifices his Shifting Ceratops. Vein Ripper triggers and Harvester triggers, so I drain him. Vein Ripper dies, he fights Chainer. Chainer dies and I draw a card. And last but not least he fights my Harvester, which dies, and then I draw another card. He attacks me with everything and then he has an Etali trigger, which he casts a Glimmer of Genius and a Topiary Stomper. He uses Glimmer of Genius first and then he taps his Progenitor's icon to flash in a Curious Altisor and then Topiary Stomper resolves. I take a total of 12 damage and he draws 2 cards. In Joshua's end step, Christopher pays 3 energy to draw a card with his commander. He untaps and draws. He plays a tapped land and afterwards he cycles an irrigated farmland, drawing a card. He taps a total of 3 mana to cast Intelligence Bobblehead, gaining an energy on cast. Afterwards he attacks me with his Synth Eradicator and his Paladin. I take a total of 6 damage and he will gain 3 life. On attack he exiles the top card to gain 2 more energy. And then he taps his commander to draw another card and passes the turn, so I untap and draw. I play a land. I tap 2 mana to cast Talisman of Conviction. I tap 2 more to cast Talisman of Indulgence. Afterwards I tap 7 mana to cast Virtue of Persistence and then I pass the turn. Joshua untaps and draws. He recasts his commander Pantlaza, holding priority and flashing in a Thundering Spineback, discovering into a Scion of Calamity, and casting Firstborn of Gishav. Paying the 2 so Etali deals damage to Christopher's Paladin, which he sacrifices in response. After that Joshua full swings at me, his Etali exiles my Etali and his Gishard. He casts both and sacrifices his own Etali, and then I take a total of 19 damage. Joshua passes the turn afterwards, so Christopher untaps and draws. He attacks me. On attack he exiles his top card, making another 2 energy and I take 3 damage. He casts a Talisman of Progress, gaining an energy. He casts a Mystic Forge, gaining an energy. He casts an Enthusiastic Mechanaut from the top of his library, gaining an energy. Then he casts a Mind Stone from the top of his library, gaining an energy. In his end step I cast a Vampiric Tutor, finding a card to the top of my library. Then I untap. And in my upkeep I bring back Apex Altisor, fighting Vita first. Then Joshua's Spineback. And then his Altisor. After that I stop to fight and I draw for turn. I tap a total of 8 mana to recast my commander, Kroxa Kunoros, exiling 5 cards, bringing back Vein Ripper. Afterwards I pass the turn, so Joshua untaps and draws. He taps a lot of mana to cast Raging Regisaur. He discovers into an Atsokan Seer, which he also casts. He sacrifices it to bring back Zakama to his hand from his graveyard. Afterwards he taps a lot more mana to cast Zakama. With Zakama's ETB on the stack I path to exile Zakama and then he untaps all of his lands. Afterwards he taps even more mana to cast Regisaur Alpha and makes a token on ETB. He makes his Gishav unblockable with Rogue's Passage and then he swings a lot of creatures at me. On attack Etali triggers, so he casts Christopher's Sentinel Sarah Lions, and he also casts my Ragavan Nimble Pilferer. I block as followed as Kroxa blocks the Sign of Calamity, Apex Altisor blocks Etali, and my Vein Ripper blocks his Raging Regisaur. A lot of creatures die, so I have 3 Vein Ripper triggers, and another Apex Altisor trigger. With all of those triggers on the stack, Christopher uses his Intelligence Bobblehead to draw a few cards, then the Vein Ripper trigger resolve. Apex Altisor fights his Son of Gishard, a Vein Ripper trigger. Then I fight Gishav, which is a trigger for Vein Ripper again. Gisha fails to find, and the Sign of Calamity Myriad token destroys the Intelligence Bobblehead. In his end step, Christopher pays 5 energy and brings back the Motherlode, gaining 8 energy on ETB. He untaps and draws. He casts a Soul Ring for free. Afterwards, he uses his Mystic Forge to get rid of a card, paying a life. He plays a land. He pays 5 energy and taps his commander to bring back a creature from his graveyard, which is Rex Cyberhound. He pays 2 more energy to exile my Chainer Nightmare Adept, and 2 more energy to exile my Doom Whisperer. He surveils for 2 life. He casts a Virtuoso, getting 3 energy on ETB. And then he attacks Joshua with his Motherlode. On attack he pays the energy, destroying Rogue's Passage, and now only creatures with flying can block, so Joshua takes 7 damage. In his second main phase, he casts an Evertide Whale, gaining 6 energy on ETB. Afterwards he casts a T45 Power Armor, and he pays 3 more to equip it to the Evertide Whale, and then he passes the turn. I untap, and in my upkeep I bring back Apex Altisaur. Altisaur fights Ragavan, I get a Vein Ripper trigger and drain Joshua, then I get another trigger fighting Rex. In response, Christopher surveils for 2 life, the fight happens, I get a Vein Ripper trigger, Apex Altisaur fights Virtuoso, he in response makes a token, I fight the token, I have a lot of Vein Rippers as you can see all the time. And before I get the final fight, Christopher uses an improvised Bottle Cap Blast to destroy my Apex Altisaur. I get another Vein Ripper trigger, and then I go to my draw step. I tap a total of 7 mana to recast Elishnorn. Afterwards I move to combat, and Vein Ripper attacks Joshua and Kroxa Kunoros attack Christopher. On attack I bring back Combustible Gearhulk targeting Christopher. He lets me mill 3 cards, which is a total of 10 damage to him. And this is how Joshua dies due to the Vein Ripper in the air. In my second main phase I tap a total of 3 mana to cast Dark Deal, so we discard our hands and draw equal -1. Christopher goes to his turn, he checks all of his outs and the remaining deck size he has, and this is how he decides that he has no way of winning this game, and then he concedes, and after all, a very long game comes to an end. GG guys. Alright everybody, we are finally through with this game. The original gameplay footage took us 2 hours and 14 minutes and it was a very long game, but everybody did something with the deck, everybody was able to pop off in his own way, and we all had a lot of fun playing this game. When it comes to the card of the game, I definitely need to mention Apex Altisaur, which is simply an absolute bomb of board control, because as soon as this one hits the battlefield and the fight chain gets going, it definitely clears a huge amount of the board. As I have just said, the original footage was 2 hours and 14 minutes long, and I was able to cut it down to around about 17 minutes. So I'm really interested in hearing what you think about it. So I'd really appreciate if you leave a comment down below and let me know what you thought about this episode. With that on the stack, I'd say see you at the next one. Goodbye guys.